Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Denver Broncos beat reporters for the Denver Post. Parker Gabriel here. Ryan McFadden over there. Been a little bit since we did the pod. It's been magazine madness for the Denver Post sports staff the past couple of weeks, trying to put out a good product here for the preseason magazine. So we've been headlonging that. But Ryan, it's been a busy couple of weeks in training camp and an interesting, dare I say, a couple of preseason games for the Broncos each of the last two Sundays. Obviously, quarterback, the big story there. What do you think? Are you a full-on believer after the last two Sundays?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. You look at a guy that through two preseason games was 23 for 30, 205 yards, two passing touchdowns, 8 for 9 for 80 yards and a touchdown against Green Bay in a 27-2 victory. I believe he led scoring drives on 6 or 7 possessions, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I think it's a wraps. And it seemed this was something that we kind of knew that was coming once he got selected in April, just because the way, if you looked at how Shawn Peytons talked about Bo all this time, was about maturity, experience in college. So it's kind of like he kind of had the sense right there once he brought that up early on that they were going to kind of fast track him, given the fact that he did play he started in 61 career college games. So I'm not surprised. Seeing him in game action, I'm impressed. Obviously, he was going against backups, but overall, I thought he ran the offense well. There were some, going back to the Indy game, there were some plays where he kind of questioned his ball placement, and but besides that, I thought he was efficient. I think his ability to make plays, extend plays with his legs, I think that's going to be a huge addition to this team and his offense. And they just look. Denver's offense is pretty exciting with Bo Nix under center. Granted, it is preseason, but there's a lot to take away from his performance in these last two games.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's pretty simple. And look, I mean, circumstances change in preseason games. Nobody plays, 3 possessions there and 4 possessions there under identical circumstances or against the same level of competition or whatever. But if you want to bottom line it, the Broncos have scored on 6 of the 7 series Bo Nix has played, and I think they've scored on 5 of 16 that the other 2 guys have played. So, you kind of have been looking all along. This is one of the things that I've thought all along, Ryan. We've talked about this before, is that in a lot of ways, this was not just purely Bo Nix against Jarrett Stidham against Zach Wilson. It was Bo Nix against the clock, trying to figure out, is he ready to throw him into a regular season NFL game? And frankly, we'll find out, right? There's no way of saying right now, oh yeah, he's definitely ready. He's definitely going to play well at Seattle and on during the season. But simultaneously, I think if you're the Broncos and if you're Shawn Peyton, you couldn't have asked for a lot more over the course of training camp. So that's where it is right now. Obviously, it's we're recording this Monday evening. There's been no announcement from Shawn Peyton. In fact, he made it very clear last night after the game that he would not be making any announcement on Sunday night about the starting quarterback job. But common sense is going to prevail here eventually, maybe as soon as this week. And it would be a shock, I think, if anybody besides Bo Nix was playing in Seattle. So I guess, Ryan, let's, what is it? I mean, you mentioned a couple things, but tell me what it is, that stood out to you about Bo so far in the maybe the games compared to what we've seen in practice. And then also where do you still have questions about, what it's going to look like for him in the regular season?
Yeah, probably one of the things that stands out to me about Bo is just how quick he's getting that ball out. I think that was one, if you remember going back to last year dealing with Russell Wilson, that was kind of one of the issues that Peyton had with Russell Wilson, is him holding the ball too long, taking in sacks. The way Bo Nix is able to get that ball out so quick, I think that's been impressive. And like I said, I hit on it before. It's just the way he can use his legs to scramble, and that's going to help with in terms of their offensive game plan, because you can incorporate a ton of run designs for Bo Nix and get positive yardage. So those are the 2 things that take away from me. I think moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see how he does handle. Let's say he is Seattle week 1, that's your starter. How he's going to handle a full game with against first team guys. I thought even though it was a practice, but his joint practice working with the first team against Green Bay, I thought he looked sharp there. So that'll be interesting to see right there. I think going back to, like I said, the ball placement stuff. When it's time for him to launch the ball down the field, that was one of the questions going into the draft, was his deep ball. How's that going to look in game action? And also too, I think sometimes when you look at Bo Nix, it's time I guess he's still trying to get comfortable in terms of managing in the pocket. Sometimes when you look at his footwork, he looks kind of shaky there. And it looks like he's looks a little bit nervous. And then after a while, as the game develops, he starts to get that comfortability. So I think that's another thing I want to see, like as the season progresses, how comfortable he's going to continue to get working inside the pocket.
Yeah, I agree. What's interesting, one of the things that you just don't really get much of a sense of the first couple weeks of training camp is how a guy settles into a rhythm, because you're watching a lot of 7-on-7 and team reps where it's like, Bo Nix is up for 4, and then Jarrett Stidham's up for 4, and then Zach Wilson's up for 4. And there's just not a lot of situations where you're watching a guy, mount a 7-play drive, an 11-play drive, going back to concepts or adding wrinkles sort of like on the fly or whatever. And so one of the things that's been really impressive with Bo so far, and again, caveats about playing against backups and all that, that's fair. But the 6 drives that they've scored on, they've all included multiple first downs too. It's 11 plays, 7 plays, 9 plays, 10 plays. They're generating first downs. He's operated pretty calmly on third down. I think he had the penalty on the one last night that looked like the touchdown to Javonte Williams, and he was past line of scrimmage. But by and large, it's looked pretty smooth for him. And so that's one of the things that, if that carries over to the game, and then think too that they're going to be game planning too. Obviously defenses will prepare differently starting with Seattle for Denver than you see in the preseason, but same goes for Denver the other way. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch Shawn Peyton and that offensive brain trust, Davis Webb, Pete Carmichael, Joe Lombardi, that whole group, tailor a game plan for Bo Nix. What do they think it is that he's going to do well? What do they try to stay away from? How much do they play him under center? All that stuff is going to be really interesting. How does he handle, assuming again he's the starter, how does he handle a really raucous environment, one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL at Lumen Field up there? All this stuff is just sort of we're all going to learn it and see it together. And so it's just it's very interesting. I think he's made progress, certainly, not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, but you get this sense, especially last night, I thought, Ryan, you're starting to get that little bit of a sense from the other guys on the team that they're excited to, and that they see something in him that gives them a sense of hope or excitement or anticipation or whatever. He just kind of has that thing. Doesn't mean it's going to work necessarily, but he has that thing where when you listen to veteran guys talk, they seem to think that he's at least as ready as you could ask of a guy who's never done it before.
Yeah, most definitely. You could tell, like you said, you could tell the guys are excited. They would describe different plays. I think one of the things with PJ Locke, he really had a lot. I think it was a couple of weeks ago when he talked about Bo Nix. He really got a lot of good insight on him and talking about not looking at his first read, making no-look passes. We saw it at one point during training camp. I think Pat Surtain talked to in the interview with Kate Adams how OTAs Bo Nix the no-look pass, and they were shocked and impressed at how he caught them off guard. And that's what they're saying. In addition to these guys are praising him for his maturity. They're praising him for what he does in the pocket. They're praising him in terms of being a good teammate, and as well as learning from each other. So I think you can tell these guys are all in. And granted, they spoke highly of all 3 quarterbacks, but you can really tell they're all in on Bo Nix, and they have a lot of optimism of what he can bring.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, Ryan, we'll see. Obviously, Shawn Peyton will make a decision at some point. Obviously, the quarterbacks will hear it first, and then, the information will disseminate in some way, shape, or form. I'm curious. It doesn't. I just don't think last year they played hardly any starters except for a couple guys that have been hurt in the 3rd preseason game. And if Bo's the guy, which, we obviously expect that he will be, if he's the guy, if you're not playing your first offensive line in the third preseason game against Arizona, then you're not playing him. Like there's no reason to put him out there behind a sort of makeshift backup offensive line if you think he's ready to go in Seattle. So it may be the last we see of that top group, at least in a game setting, until the regular season starts. But it's not the end of the decision making for Shawn Peyton and the Broncos, not by a long shot. So let me put you on the spot, Ryan. If Bo Nix is number one, then what do you do with the other two guys?
That's tough because I can see a reality where he keeps both Stidham and Zach Wilson just because, you go into you look at Jarrett Stidham, like he's someone that's, been in this offense for more than a year. He's still a good locker room guy, teammates like him, coaching staff like him. And then you got Zach Wilson, who, like, even though the full picture isn't perfect, it's not beautiful. Like he's had his struggles throughout his his career, but man, like you can't teach that arm talent.
No. Yeah.
And there's times in practice where it's like you'll watch him throw the ball and you're like, man, if only he can like put the whole picture together. What could it be? And you could tell like over time it looked like, oh man, I don't know, like does he make it? Is it for him? And then as he keeps getting comfortable with the offense, he's go out there in preseason games, making plays during training camp. You can kind of tell like Shawn Peyton himself and that coach staff is starting to say, oh man, this could be something. Like we might have something there with Zach Wilson. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Or what you do is you keep Stidham just because of the experience he has with the team from last year, and see if Zach Wilson puts enough tape together where he can have maybe an Albert O game next week where it can lead to a potential a trade, because at the end of the day he's still a former second overall pick in 2021, and teams probably could still value that in terms of saying, hey, maybe it didn't work here, but we could probably find some room for us to see what he can do. But yeah, I look at it like it's tough. I think that's the tough decision here, because it seems like they already solidified a starting job. But what happens with the next two guys? And I won't be surprised they keep three. I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily. I mean, I don't think it's out of the question at all that they keep three. I think it's much more likely than I would have told you at the beginning of training camp, and it's because of the way Zach Wilson's played. To put this like in the most PG terms possible, I've said like all through training camp that Zach Wilson was leading the quarterback room in like holy smokes throws and also in what the heck throws. And that's but the what the heck has decreased largely as camp's gone along, and he's really looked like he's playing comfortable, and it looks like he's enjoying playing, for a coaching staff that has a clean structure to it and that has stability to it and that knows exactly what it wants from a quarterback. And so like, I don't know, Ryan, like if someone called me up, if I was in that seat, Shawn Peyton, George Peyton, like somebody called me up on cutdown day and said, hey, we'll give you a 7th round pick or a 6th round pick for Zach Wilson. Like, I'm not sure if I would take it like right now, because I wonder if there's more upside there. But it gets complicated because he's only under contract for this year. So by the end of the year, if you don't have some sort of agreement with him, then like he's just a free agent. And then great, you developed him to what? Go play well somewhere else. Like, so it's a very interesting situation with Zach Wilson. I just think like the signs, the stuff that you've seen from him in camp and in the preseason games, although it wasn't as sharp last night, but like just what you've seen from him, like it's worth keeping him. I think I really do. Like, I think that there's something there, and it seems to me, speculation largely, but like, it seems to me like the coaching staff might think that too. Like, and listen, like, Bo Nix is likely going to be the starter and all that, but like, it's one thing to start the opener. It's another thing just to stay healthy for 17 games. And nobody wants anybody to get hurt, but there's just never a guarantee, whether it's health or performance or whatever, that you're going to go through a whole year. And so like Zach's a guy that I don't know that I would have thought this a month ago, but he's shown enough that I think that you've got to keep him. And, if that costs Jarrett Stidham a spot on the roster, like that would be unfortunate, but that might be the reality. But largely, I mean, Zach's performance is why I think there's every chance that they do end up keeping 3 at least to start the year. Because even if you could get one of those guys right into the practice squad, the first time somebody needs a quarterback and they come to try to sign him, what are you going to do? You're either going to lose them or you're going to sign them to the active roster anyways. So, like, maybe you could start the year with 2 and 1 on the practice squad, but you probably are going to have to bump them up to the roster at some point anyways. So it might end up that they just take the 3 to start.
Yeah, and also too, it could be a situation where you keep the 3, and maybe when you get to the trade deadline.
Yep.
And there could be a team out there, someone like Minnesota, who just lost JJ McCarthy for the whole year. It could be a situation like that where, let's say, Sam Darnold isn't producing the way they expected, and they need some assurance in their QB room. They might call Denver and say, "Hey, we'll give you a 6 or a 7 for Zach, or a 6 or a 7 or whatever for Jarrett Stidham." So you could use that and keep 3 on the court, but keep 3. That could be another reason you keep 3 on the active roster. But like you said, it's like Zach Wilson over these past 2 weeks, I think, has made it really hard to say, "Hey, thanks for coming here for the summer,
Yep.
but we're going a different direction." It's just, I think, and also too, you gotta look at Shawn Payton. I think Shawn Payton, that's the type of guy where it's like, I can't see the team just letting him walk and they don't get nothing back in return. So it's like you either keep him or you figure out a way to find a partner to get you some draft picks. I just don't see them just walking and letting Zach Wilson just walk out of Denver. It just, because you can tell they see some talent there. I'm not saying, oh, he's just revived and he might have a chance to be a star down the road. It might be a situation where he's just a really good backup for the rest of his career, and that's fine. He didn't pan out as a second overall pick, but at this stage of his career, if he's just a really good backup who you can, if something happens to your QB1, that you can go in and maybe win you a game, maybe win you two or 3 over a 4-week stretch, then that's not bad at this certain stage of his career. So, and that's going to be a tough decision, like how that's going to play out. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think I won't be surprised if we see 3 guys, 3 QBs on the active roster.
The other thing about Zach, just one more quick here, is that he's only a couple months older than Bo Nix. I mean, he's newly 25, I think. He's a young guy, and on top of that, if you're Shawn Payton, you could have all the confidence in the world that Bo Nix is going to be exactly what you thought he was going to be, that he's going to be the franchise guy and all that. But it's not a certainty at this point. It's just not. And if you have a kid who you think is really talented, why wouldn't you want 2 bites at the apple rather than 1? I guess that's part of the way I look at it, is we have a good understanding of what Jarrett Stidham is, and he's a good backup, right? And he might, in the right circumstance, he might be a fine starter who, plays on a team that's in contention and all of that. But to me, given the whole way this year has gone so far for the Broncos, all the changes they've made, the effort to get younger and cheaper and all of that, if push came to shove between Stidham and Wilson, the upside play with Wilson wouldn't shock me. But it's not that simple, because they could theoretically keep 3. So interesting stuff to watch over the next, cut down day, Ryan, now is in 8 days. So, so we'll find out a lot in the next week or so. Just before we go, I want to get to a couple of other, sort of position battles, interesting spots on the roster quickly. Ryan, what have you made at corner, opposite Pat, obviously, and then at inside linebacker?
I think after 2 games, I think it looks like Riley Moss has locked down the starting cornerback job on the upside, Pat Surtain. Just because he started both games. I know Pat didn't play the first one, but it's kind of telling that when Pat did play last night against Green Bay, Riley Moss was also starting as well. And he also had a really good practice in the joint practice on Friday. And it's like you came out of that practice. Overall, that secondary just shut down Jordan Love and Green Bay's offense on that Friday. It was just impressive to watch. But Riley Moss is you watched him play throughout that whole morning. It was I think this guy just locked it down. It's just what he brings in terms of athleticism, his ball skills, his speed to keep up with wide receivers. I think that right there, I think he kind of locked down that position, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the room plays out because Vance Joseph said how much they do need corners.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting how like the depth chart plays out with that. But I think Riley Moss is your guy. I think he's your guy starting quarterback. And when it comes to inside linebacker, I think Cody Barton. I think Cody Barton's had a solid camp. He's made a few plays in these last 2 preseason games. I think he's locked down that position, that starting job there as well.
Yeah, and I think simultaneously the guys behind them in those competitions are still going to have roles, like especially Damari Mathis. Like, just again, you can't have enough options at corner, and he's a guy who, he was sort of in that mold at the beginning of camp where he had a chance to win a starting job, and there's a chance he also like wouldn't make the roster, right? And so like he's played pretty well. I thought he looked solid last night against Green Bay in the preseason game, and so he's a guy who just like he's very talented. He struggled last year, obviously, and got benched, and then was a special teams player. And so, 3rd-year guy. They may need him at some point. Chris Abrams-Drain, the rookie, has had a promising first training camp, and so you can sort of start to see the puzzle pieces. We'll have to see. Like Levi Wallace was running last night before the game, but has dealt with the hamstring issues. So, sort of like remains to be seen, I think. What his role is, or if he's going to be ready in the next week before the roster cut down. And then Jonas Griffith, like you can tell he's been working back in, right? Like he makes some plays. He's had a couple coverage situations where guys have run by him. Like he hasn't played in a long time. He's sort of working it out. They may well need him at some point too, for as much as an Iron Man as Alex Singleton's been. You just never know. So, and he's played a ton of special teams so far in camp in the preseason games. So all kinds of stuff going on there. And then one more before we go, Ryan. Tim Patrick touchdown last night. Sean Keeler, our columnist at the Post, wrote, Shawn Peyton, don't overthink it. Tim Patrick is important to the room and to the offense. Has there been any part of you that's been surprised with like how quickly seemingly Tim's come back from missing 2 years to sort of get back in the flow and produce, even if it's, preseason games?
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised because like going into training camp, I felt like Tim might have been someone who was like on the out, like had that uphill climb in terms of making a roster, just given the fact that they drafted Devon Bailey and Troy Franklin in the NFL draft. They signed Josh Reynolds. They traded away Jerry Jeudy. They expect Marvin Mims to have a little bit of a larger role on offense going into this fall. So it was kind of like, all right, what are they going to do at that position? Are you going to keep a guy at 30 years old with coming back from 2 back-to-back season injuries, and they were in like you're talking about ACL and Achilles, so these are not like those injuries are not to be played with, and something Tim Patrick mentioned before, like a Achilles injury in football, just for some that's career ending.
Yep.
And to see him go out and make plays, I believe 4 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown last night. He had that reception in the opening series against the Colts. It's just he has looked really good, and he's progressed in training camp as well. And I think that's a guy where I can't see Shawn Payton not keeping him on. Like I can't see him keeping him off the roster. I think this is a guy you have to keep just because of you've seen him be a reliable target in preseason games. This is a guy who is respected in the locker room. So you have like him and Sutton as your veteran guys in that wide receiver room. And Troy Franklin, as much talent he has, and the speed that he possesses, he has not had the most promising training camp. So, like, do you really, part ways with Tim Patrick and just hope during the regular season Troy Franklin, comes together? Or if you're still in this win now mode, then I think your best bet is to keep Tim Patrick, just knowing what he can provide, and he has proven that he can be productive. So I think they can keep him. I think it'll be. I think next step is like, all right, how will they handle the rookies in that wide receiver room, Bailey and Troy Franklin? Bailey has put together some really good practice. He has stood out almost in every practice he's played in. Given the fact that he's long, he can win those 50-50 win those 50-50 battles and make those contested catches. And almost every practice he has made a play.
Yep.
that's wild the fans. So and that's another guy. It's like it's hard to like you got to find a role for him. And Shawn Payton said one time we got to keep giving him the football. Now he's been dealing with that injury that we still don't know too much about, but I think he's put enough good tape together during practices to say, hey, I think we need to keep him on the roster. I think given the fact that Troy Franklin was someone that the Broncos traded up to acquire, I think he still makes that team. He might be a situation where you might see him on an inactive list quite a bit
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
the regular season. But it's like I look at a guy like that is if you think he's going to get through waivers, then you'll be a fool. I think someone will pick him up and see what they can do with him. So I think you have to keep him. But I think Tim Patrick through these especially last night, to me, I think he has solidified a role on this team.
Yeah, definitely. The chemistry with Bo Nix, I mean, I don't think that should be overlooked either. Like if you're going to play a rookie quarterback and you've got a veteran guy who's a big target, catch radius, understands coverage, understands, how to get open, like how valuable is that to a young quarterback? A security blanket in the middle of the field. We saw him, I think, convert 2 third downs last night. So that's just that's the kind of stuff where even if he's not making big over the top catches, like he's a chain mover. He really is. And so if he can be that is plenty valuable for the Broncos. And then, yeah, I agree with you on Franklin. I mean, maybe a redshirt year, but the other thing about that is like, it may be that he's inactive early in the season and he makes strides behind the scenes, and then you see him contribute in the second half or 14 weeks in or whenever that opportunity comes. So fascinating room. It's going to be interesting. I mean, who knows? Curveball maybe in there somewhere over the next week or so, but there's not a lot of time left, but it seems like there's a lot of decisions still to be made. So we'll have it all for you. Obviously, we've got a ton of coverage. denverpost.com/Broncos. We'll be back next week, I would think probably before and after the roster cut down. And yeah, we've got it all covered for you on the Broncos front. So for Ryan, I'm Parker. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll talk to you guys soon.